believe in the ripple effect.
What's up? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. Of course, I'm your host, Ricardo Vendas, also known as Ricky Francis, and a great episode for you today. Today we have returning guest and a regular on the Ripple Effect Podcast and a regular on my other show, The Union of the Unwanted, which is a roundtable panel discussion show I host with Sam Tripoli from the Tinfoil Hat Podcast, best-selling author Charlie Robinson, and host of the Macro Aggression Podcast, and of course, Midnight Mike from the OBDM show. So definitely check out that show if you're not familiar with it. Of course, links will be in the show description. But today, Ryan is here to talk about current events, and we share many of our thoughts on what we think is going on, where we're heading, and much more. So this is a very fascinating and fun discussion that I know you're going to enjoy. But before we get into this fascinating and fun discussion, let me remind you this is a Value for Value show. If you get some value out of the discussions I bring to you, please consider giving some value back. It doesn't have to be financial. You can rate, review, tell people about the show, create clips and share that. Do anything you can to help the algorithms that are censoring conversations and shows like these. But if you are in a good financial situation, there's plenty of ways of supporting the show. You can check out our sponsors, of course, but you can also send a one-time donation via Venmo or PayPal. You can send a one-time donation to my crypto wallet. You can also join us on Patreon and support us with as little as $1 a month. And everyone who does, I truly, truly appreciate it. If a small percentage of people listen and watch the Ripple Effect Podcast, donate it as little as $1 a month. And let's be honest, you wouldn't even notice that $1 a month is gone. You spend much more money on coffee and snacks and things that don't bring you as much value as the Ripple Effect Podcast. So no contribution is too little. Write reviews, share it, tell people, post it on your social media platforms. Any amount of help I can get is much, much appreciated. I know we're all busy. We're all dealing with bills and inflation, and the prices of everything has gone up. So I know it's tough for all of us. But if you can, if you find it in your heart to support a content creator who pours a lot of time, energy, and money into trying to bring the world a thought-provoking podcasts and conversations that hopefully people appreciate and enjoy. Don't forget to go to the Ripple Effect Podcast merch.com to check out our merch. Our merch store is now run by Big Frog Merch. They do amazing work. The print looks phenomenal. The quality of the material is second to none. And they're also a small family business. So you can support a podcast that you enjoy, an independent content creator, and you can support a small business while hopefully also sparking some conversations, because who knows, you might wear some Ripple Effect Podcast merch, run into a listener, and hopefully make a new friend or have some interesting conversations. That's it, guys. Remember, all these links are in the show description and on my website, therippleeffectpodcast.com. And I will talk to you guys in the next one. Peace. So what's been on your radar lately?
Well, the big questions as always. I think obviously I've been very much focused on what's going on in Gaza. I think that's a literally an earth-changing event, and not because it hasn't always been going on for a long time, but because of the way that Israel handled it post October 7th, it has quite literally changed the international dynamic. Right? In every possible way. You've got people who are taking advantage of the way that, like right now, I'm going to talk about this later today on my show, the example of Ukraine and the bombing in Crimea that just took place yesterday, right? Their argument is literally that, well, Crimea is an occupied territory, which, by the way, it's not. Remember, legally voted and there was a whole, they just lie about the whole dynamic. But then ultimately they say, well, because that's the case, there's no friendly civilian areas. This is all a ploy, or like they kind of take this one tweet in like three different directions. The overall point is there's nobody innocent there. These are civilians, but it's Russia's fault. So they're taking a page right out of Israel's book, just going, oh, well, screw. If they're going to call everybody human shields and to kill everybody and no one cares, then we'll do the same thing. And let's not forget, the Azov movement is funded through Israel, as well as the CIA and plenty of other groups. So it's like that clear dynamic. One small thing, like that's the negative way, but then in positive ways, we see people all around the world, like very clearly beginning to find the courage to call out Israel, to call out their practices, to call out the illegal and ongoing dishonest and illegal practices of the United States government, of Britain, and a lot of these cascading changes, which, I also see negatives within that, where you've got power structures and people trying to sort of co-opt that momentum under the guise of fighting for the right thing to drive you. And this stuff always happens, as you know. Every topic, no matter what, you always have these kind of vying things. But to me, it's just such a powerful moment. Like the protests and what were going on at the campuses, and that tried to get kind of pigeonholed into like, oh, the woke left and their pink hair and masks and all that. But that's not really what it was. It was a worldwide thing. I find as much as there's so many bad things happening just in that topic, it's like almost like a moment of inspiration. Like I can see this opening where I rarely see that things could truly change, and I don't think they will, not in the way that I want them to, but they could, if we were able to see past our partisan divides and all the childish nonsense that comes out of the two-party paradigm from both sides. All that to be said, I think that is just, I've immersed myself in this, and my audience knows I've been talking about this for a long time with foreign policy, but tell you, man, it's amazing to watch how much has changed. The basic things that people are saying now that before were like, shall not be spoken kind of thing. It's really incredible. But aside from that, I still follow up a lot on the COVID-19 medical freedom conversation, because I think, interestingly enough, we can get into it if you like, I see them as kind of the same story in a lot of abstract ways, but very importantly from a worldwide perspective. Talked with Brad Miller recently about his military declaration, the Declaration of Military Accountability that he put out with this group of other military people, and that's largely about medical freedom, but a lot of other things, kind of youth force policy, and it's just I keep track of a lot of things, I think, but that Israel and Gaza tends to be the main focus, I think, for me right now.
Yeah, it's hard to even talk to people about this topic though, because people are so it's like everything in life, everything's so tribalistic, and people pick a team. And do you think that, so is there any concern, speaking of both sides and perspectives, is there a concern about, obviously there is this people just being blinded by what the issues really are, and then this hatred towards Jewish people, even though there's plenty of Jewish people that are not pro-Israel and whatnot. Is there any concern about that being weaponized in a way?
It's not I mean, yes, but it's very real, active, and in real time, easy to identify. Like nobody anywhere should argue that there's no racism. You get that from ridiculous parts of the right wing conversation. Like on the left, everything's racist. Like it's always like that. But the point is that there's real racism. Nobody anywhere should pretend that's not true. And in some cases, it's very serious and something we should be calling out. But obviously, racism outside of action, just speaking bad, that falls under free speech. That doesn't mean I support it. Free speech, I do, but we have the right through free speech to say, well, you're a disgusting human being and should be shunned from society. Like that's the dynamic. But my point is, it's real, obviously. There is obvious anti-Semitism, even within this conversation, that is very apparent. I mean, it's as simple as, and let's also remember what Semites are, and Palestinians technically are in that category, but the game is about using that one term about only attacks on Jewish people. And what's interesting is that clearly you can see that there is that, and within different groups and different, not even connected to the Palestine conversation, but what we're talking about in this, and your point about being weaponized, is this is one of the largest things that have kind of unraveled throughout this post-October 7th genocide from Israel, which is that even people, and I think prominently now within the Jewish community, anti-Zionists, but just Jews in general that see what Israel is showing themselves to be, are standing up and going, well, look, I'm all for highlighting and calling out anti-Semitism, but when you label things that are not racist, that are just criticisms, genuine criticisms of Israel's government, their policy in foreign countries, and then you go, you just secretly hate Jews, and you turn that into some anti-Semitic claim, you're actually creating anti-Semitism. You're making it less safe for Jews or anybody else that is trying to actually fight racism. You're making it meaningless. And this is the most important part. This is like the U.S. government talking about freedom and democracy, and the way that they point at what they do and say the good words when they do the opposite. And then that kind of just makes the words become meaningless. And this is why you see people out there using it the same way. But the weaponization of that, or any number of things throughout this conversation, is not only, and by the way, been going on for 75 years, even longer. It's not just Israel, or Zionism, I should correctly call that, but that it's very clearly being identified. And I see that as such an important, positive thing. But again, and if we're having an honest conversation, we should then show, because of that, you have a counterbalance of people then that start acting like none of it is real. And we just have to be careful of that. Like, as you just kind of highlighted, that's always there, right? You have that two-party illusion kind of dynamic that's always trying to weaponize the thing for their benefit. And then you get the people within that, they're all tribal, high-fiving each other for being on the right team. They just go with whatever the team narrative is, and this is, I'd like to argue, not the majority. I could be wrong, but I think that it's changing rapidly. And so that is one positive thing. But to your question about weaponizing it, it's everywhere, from both sides, in fact. And I don't even mean it from like left, right. I mean, both sides of the argument, right? You're getting it weaponized in both ways, I think.
Yeah, that's the part that's interesting and also a little bit concerning, right? It's like no movements or protests ever seem to be organic. They always seem to be pawns in a bigger game. Obviously, like you said, you've been doing deep dives into this. Something that has been brought up quite a bit is October 7th. Did they know it was going to happen? Did they let it happen? And if so, what was the reason and purpose of that? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, before I want to, I'd like to talk about October 7th. I just did a show on that, but you made a comment just now about the protesters and stuff. And I think just passing point about organic. And I think what's important to make sure we remember is, I think every protest, especially, I don't know if it's always been this way, but far as I've been paying attention, I think every movement, protest, at the very least, is under attack, or attempts are made to infiltrate for benefit, right? I mean, I don't even know why that's just something people would balk at. It's it's just as simple as corporations or individuals who are like, I disagree with them, I'm going to try to run into the ground, or, any number of ways that I think governments do that actively, all of them, U.S. being chief among them, doing this around the world. And so it's interesting to see that you can always prove that. But to what degree? And is it enough that you should disregard the movement, right? And this is the part of doing our own research and being educated on these things and being okay, going, well, I'm not sure, so I'm not going to lean in all the way or not. That's the thing today. People are so uncomfortable going like, well, I don't know right now, so we'll leave it there, But the movement we saw, and is still ongoing from these colleges, and it wasn't just college protests. That's kind of the way the two-party, mostly the right side. And when I say right, I don't mean just conservatives. Realize, and this is what a lot of conservatives and even liberals are seeing. The Democrat, Republican, two-party extremism sides are not really all that honest, and I think they're seeing that. So I actually see most of those other parties or sides, liberal and conservative, starting to see a lot of this. My point, though, is that the right-wing side of this conversation became very, it was just a bunch of mask-wearing, pink hair-wearing maniacs who don't, it's all about the George Soros angle, right? That's why I want to bring this up, is that and of course we should ask that question. And you can see that there is a little bit of funding that came, I think, back in 2019 to one of the groups that were involved. I think it was Jewish Voice for Peace, but I don't remember off the top of my head. The point being, you can clearly see that these groups take money, right? A lot of these groups don't even know about George Soros the way that we would see this, and a lot of money flows. But the point is that it wasn't just this one little fake little, it was not some co-opted concept. It was a worldwide thing of people standing up and unanimously, or, kind of together, calling out Israel and Zionism. And I think it was dangerous the way that it just got shoved aside as some George Soros funded thing, which I think Alex Jones and the rest of them were all screaming about. And it's like, I think it's about protecting Israel, quite frankly. But anyway, to your question, unless you want to go more on that, I think that's important. The protest and what was actually happening there. I think it's a worldwide change in opinion. But October 7th is why that happened. And I'm convinced of that. Go ahead.
Well, I weirdly enough, one of the people that I think has done, and I'm not a huge fan of his, but he's done a pretty good job of trying to get people from both sides of the argument, is Piers Morgan. And he seems to call out people on both sides. And he had Abby Martin on, which I've been a huge fan of. I've been watching Abby
Mhm.
Martin since Breaking the Set on the RT back in the day, and
Right.
just a huge fan of her work. But when people like her go on and they struggle to like ever give the other side any credibility at all, even when it's like obvious, he's kind of highlighting the issue with this issue. And she would beat around the bush about Hamas and if Hamas has done any harm, or if it's a terrorist organization, or any of these things. And it was like, you know to me, it's the problem with a lot of these issues. It's like we become so tribalistic that we don't ever want to say we don't know, like you said,
Mhm.
which isn't, I don't know if it's an ego thing of like we don't want to. We assume that if we say we don't know something, it's almost like our audience, or the people who look to for answers with our work, might lose, I don't know, like interest in our work because we say. But to me, that's not the way I look at it. If I have a content creator or researcher journalist who admits they don't know when they don't probably know, to me it's like, okay, they're honest, and
Right.
and they're also searching for truth and answers just like I am. And when they don't have them, they're okay with saying they don't have them. Like they're comfortable with that notion. And to me, that's really important, because the truth is, like, we don't always have the answers. And a lot of times when these stories happen, even like the October 7th story, like I didn't mention it for a while because I would hear some rumors about like possibly knowing it was going to happen and letting it happen, all these things. And I'm like, okay, these are all fun theories, and I'm going to explore them, but I'm not going to pick a team or pick a side quite yet. And I want to kind of give myself time to
Mhm.
analyze the situation. But then when you get somebody like Abby, who, Pierce, and of course it's for TV, but Pierce does a good job of like trying to like, have these like got you moments where it's like, admit that Hamas is a terrorist group, and it's like he looks bad because now it's like you're just trying to get these clips, that go viral. And if you're really putting on a show for open dialogue and discussion about these issues, like, hey, how about you stop trying so hard to get these people to say things that is going to go viral and you can kind of highlight or whatever. But
Right.
Abby doesn't do herself any help herself at all either, because she beats around the bush. And he's had quite a few guests like that like will beat around the bush anytime he's trying to get you to just say, hey, like, hey, what Hamas is doing is wrong too, right?
Well, but I think there's a reason. I mean, I'm not trying to. I mean, I haven't seen the clip that you're referencing, so maybe you're spot on. But I tend to see. I think I know what you're talking about with Abby or anybody else when they get in that spot where it's like, do you condemn Hamas kind of thing? And the whole problem is that it's a dishonest premise, right? So it's not a yes or no answer. And what you're trying to say is like, well, look, you're trying to get me to respond in a small way that is not, there's so much nuance and complexity to this conversation. My point continues, and I find this to be sort of like a in reverse playing the game back at them kind of thing on Twitter, where they go, do you condemn Hamas, you support Hamas or whatever? And I say, why would I support the group Israel funds? You know what I mean? Like that kind of thing, not saying yes or no, because it puts them in a spot to have to acknowledge what none of them they'll tap dance everywhere to try to avoid the point where you can prove Israel has funded Hamas and has right up until 2020 and after. According to Haaretz, where their Mossad chief was sent there to petition Qatar to continue funding Hamas, or Netanyahu's quick quote, which is pretty famous. But my point is that to avoid answering that is not necessarily to say that they're trying to avoid answering the question to make them look bad. It's because I think that the premise itself is not sound or accurate. We shouldn't be talking about whether or not you condemn Hamas. We should be asking about the facts of the case, about, it's the same in reverse. If you come up and you say, do you condemn Israel? I mean, I think we have every right to ask that question right now, right? I mean, I think they're committing genocide, but that's not what they believe. Right. So I know that he knows that's not what she thinks. And so you're putting him in this trap as if the point is that you have to, if you don't condemn Hamas, then you're wrong. That's like step one. And it's a trap. It's a game. And I don't think it's honest from his perspective. And I would argue that,
Good.
well, I would argue that Pierce Morgan in general I don't think he's honest. I think what he's doing is a part of this right now. I mean, look, he's been a very central role, in my opinion, to the kind of gatekeeping media But I will say, of all the people, I pointed to him many times, and I said, I'm whether or not I think he's doing it for the right reason, what he does here is important, right? Like, for instance, when he really kind of was like shocked when they didn't have an answer for how many children or civilians were killed, but they could answer how many Hamas members were killed. I think they were making both of them up, quite frankly, because they don't really care. But I think what's interesting is that it did make a lot of waves, and that actually got a lot of pushback. He was even arguing online with, I think it was like Hananya Naftali or different people in like the propaganda apparatus about the fact that he was anti-Semitic, and it was hilarious. So it's like, but anyway, the point I think is that he plays, to the way you kind of put it, this both sides game. The truth is, yes, sometimes there are two sides to a story. Sometimes there are multiple sides to a story, but sometimes there's not. Right? Sometimes there is a reality and there are a bunch of falsehoods and narratives. But like, that's my point is, it's usually there are multiple perspectives that are valid. The point is that what he's doing in a lot of ways, and this is the mainstream media, is one story here, one story there, right? Is that we do half and half. Well, we're just trying to be balanced. There's no balance when it comes to journalism. There's just the truth. And sometimes that appears balanced. Sometimes it's completely one-sided. But if it's the truth, it's the truth. And people end up debating that, and that's okay. Problem is that we end up pretending in the media spheres that if it doesn't appear balanced, then you're the one that's wrong. And I think that's a very dangerous premise that's kind of building. And there's one of the points I was going to make, but I forgot. But it was the don't know point, is that I think that I forget where you went with that. But I think it is important, as we both highlighted, to be able to say we don't know. And I think people in this media, because of things like we just discussed, Piers Morgan, almost feel forced to. Oh, that's what it was. It was that, your audience will tend to look like, oh, well, he doesn't know. So you're going to look to gravitate towards somebody who's going, I have the answer, and that's the way this kind of media sphere is built right now, is that people are afraid to say they don't know because, and I think it's the intellectually lazy out there. There's a lot of them, but will look for either the thing that I want to hear. That's the thing I'm thinking. There, I like that guy. Like, that's my news choice today, or they are, just looking for somebody claiming they know for sure because of their super secret squirrel sources that you can't see. That's all part of it, I think. But all this.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think sometimes people push back on, condemning Hamas because they realize that Piers Morgan's trying to simplify a very complicated issue. And I think that is definitely a part of it. And I think that's one of the reasons why they resist it. They'll be like, oh, you know what? Like, I know what you're doing. Like, no, there's a lot of history behind this, and there's a lot of things that we just simplify. But I think it does two things. I think it shows that he's trying to simplify a complicated issue just because he's trying to, like I said, for clicks, and it makes for good TV. And it's like, hey, I'm trying to call you out and you're not doing it. And I got you, stuck in a corner. But
right.
I think in some cases, because, for example, like Abby during COVID, she was awful. Her and Robbie, which, he stopped returning my emails. So I guess I don't mind talking about him.
I love Abby Martin. And I think that at her work on that, I wasn't so much focused on the people who weren't getting into it at the time. So I don't really know to what degree it was that bad. But probably, I don't know. My point is that I think a lot of them just were very quiet about it. And I'm not one to really condemn the absence of work. Like, James Corbett used to get so much crap from people for, like, he doesn't talk enough about 9/11, or I think that was the topic. It was one of these topics, and I'm just going, but well, not talking about something is not the same as it's almost better. Like, I argued it was more so because I don't think it was 9/11 actually, but in any case, it was, point is, maybe he's just gathering information, hasn't got his mind around it yet, whatever it is. And so I think that, like, Caitlin Johnstone, for example, who I greatly respect, also was, kind of just didn't really dive into that as much as many things you've seen. And I argue that was interesting. I mean, I've seen the other kind of people that dive into pretty much everything that's interesting, that's big and out there. And I think that was a carefully chosen propaganda and psyop, kind of agenda because of that. Because people are so interested. Like, a good example is, I think you've talked about, is the parasite stress theory that Derek covered. And all it really showed, there's multiple studies from the government on this, that the one thing they highlighted out of everything they could use that would have the best effect to drive people to tell on their neighbors, to basically willingly forego their own constitutional rights, was a pathogen. And it said, and this is the best part, it was very clear. It said, it doesn't even have to be real. Just the threat of a pathogen, fake or real, is enough to make people, and I think that's why that was chosen. And so we saw that with a lot of names that I would argue usually were quick to dive in and be all edgy about it, not worry about being called out. And I think they were just genuinely scared. I think they thought there was something going on. They thought people were being irresponsible. And for that reason, they tend, by the way, I'm not giving anybody a pass. I'll be the first to call out why that's a bad thing to do. You need to trust your gut and go with the truth, even if it's, look what we're doing with Israel right now. I've been talking about it like a lot of people have for decades, a decade. And it was way harder back then, right? The people would call you racist. They still do. But the point is, it's always been true. And I'm not talking about Jewish people or even just Israelis by large, but Zionism and the easy thing to see now, But so I think that's why that happened. And my point was that I will always respect Abby and her amazing work around this topic, because it's still to this very day some of the best work on what's going on in Gaza. And my gut tells me that I think she's a good person that cares about this stuff. That'd be my opinion. But the other person you mentioned, I don't think so. I don't even want to get into it. He went off on me for something ridiculous, and it just changed my entire opinion about who he is and what he believes and whether he's objective. That's my opinion.
They're both a little bit on the left, for lack of a better term. And the left does seem to be a little bit more emotional than logical sometimes, and I think that
it goes both ways, man. I see that thing in extreme levels equally on left and right, in my opinion. Like just emotion circumventing logic, and I don't think it's left right. I think it's Democrat Republican. There are still conservatives and liberals and even in between that we all fall for that sometimes, where you let your emotions get the better of you. But I think the people that are like you said, the tribal sides of it, that are just, because right now you got the right in some ways that are like, no, we're patriots. We don't, we're still kind of conservative, but we don't think the Republicans are all rhinos. And so they're all going through their own kind of evolution of thought there. That's what I would say.
I feel like, and again, this is just my personal experiences, and just, I guess, analyzing social media and people debating, and really my personal experiences during COVID, and then even before COVID. I remember debating people who were, my wife's family is very much on the right, and during the Obama administration, like, they hated Obama, which was okay. But and then they of course thought everybody on their side was going to be the people who were going to save us. They're the better alternative. It's like Bush is the best, and Obama wasn't even born in America, like that type of stuff. And I'm just like, okay, like I would debate them, right? So I would have like little friendly conversations about what's going on in the world and whatnot, and then it would be like a much more logical, like we would debate facts a little bit more. I have family in Long Island, same thing. Some of my family in Long Island, very, pro-Trump, very conservative. And I would have like friendly debates, and, and again, and with all these people that I'm referring to, like, there's a lot of things we agree with, but then we would have friendly debates about the things we didn't agree with. And it would seem to be much more civil debates. And then when I have a similar type of discussion with somebody from, more on the left side, it seems to be much more emotional, And
I think it depends on the topic. Like, here's a good example. Right now, and I've been saying this for as long as I've been doing this. It's a teeter-totter. And this, I guess, if you can understand, in my opinion, realize, because I think it's self-evident that this is an illusion, that these people at the end of the day seem to only align when it comes to Israel and war, and we're usually at war because of Israel. I think that's where we are right now, and I think that's when they're just always, but the point is that it's not a real divide. They're individuals with their own agendas, so I think some cases they hate each other. The point is the two-party illusion, I think, is clear. And during the COVID-19 conversation, it was very clear. The right of that conversation was way more aware of what was going on around this. And I don't know whether that was because of certain differences between the divide. Like I'm not sure. They could name many reasons why in that case, the right would be more, constitutional minded. There's a lot of different things you could argue.
Government overreach was the big thing. I think the left, for some reason, is much, they trust the government a lot, because think about a lot of their solutions, right, is more regulation, more this, more, it's like they have this trust for the government, where the right is
but
skeptical of the government.
No, so let me just flesh out that point, because that's important. And what you're saying is it goes both ways again, though, right? So, like, my point would be that you have that happening in different ways on both sides throughout this process, where, like, again, so you had the COVID-19 conversation, and that was clearly, I argue, seen a lot more by the right, because they, I just think they saw the agenda more. Now we're seeing the Israel-Gaza conversation, and it's the exact opposite. I mean, like a shocking, stark, immediate, and I'm talking things that were like, like right now you've got the right and people like Ben Shapiro and Dave Rubin who were going on a tour about cancel culture and about letting people speak and free speech. And then literally, because it was pink-haired people in mass protesting Israel, they were calling for their speech to be shut down. And well, it was through the funnel of saying, well, they're all violent anti-Semitist people. But that's not the case. You had people being violently shut down because they were simply there standing up for Palestine. And Dave Rubin and the rest of them were all screaming positive things about it. My point is that seems ridiculous. And it shows you a complete illogical either a lot of things you could frame it as, but you're inconsistent with your logic right there, right? And my point is you can show that across the board going back as far as you want to look, where it depending on the issue and time frame, you have one side that appears to be the more logical understanding, the other side presented as the more lunatic, crazy out of their mind, like with COVID-19 and the left. Or before that, it was the sane evangelical or the sane left and the evangelical right who was out of their mind. Like you get this back and forth, and now we're back in the cycle where you've got a lot of the right, but again, I'm talking about the extremes, not conservative liberal, because I think that is diminishing across the board for all agendas. But now you've got the right wing side of this that is just goose stepping into genocide, like blindly supporting Israel, completely disregarding all the things we're seeing because the narrative, right? Oh, human shields or whatever else it is. And it was the same thing with so many people on the left during COVID-19. Oh, well, here's the narrative. Here's what the CDC said. And I think that's very easy to see. But depending on different points in time, I think it changes in its own ways too. But I personally see that to be a massive illusion to keep us divided and not recognizing that the government, not one side or the other, but the government is acting to keep you under its boot at all times.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I definitely agree with most of that. I definitely also think, though, that when the same mask-wearing, pro-vaccine, pro-mask shutdown people are protesting, anti-Israel protests, it's a little concerning because it is like,
let's talk about that because this is interesting. Why do you think that?
Well, it's concerning because I'm not because I think they're again emotionally taking a side and defending that side no matter what and being tribalistic. There's a lack of information. Like there's a lack of understanding of the issue. So you're protesting an issue that you don't quite understand, just like when you're protesting COVID lockdowns, masks, Black Lives Matter, all these things. I feel like there's a lot of what you're doing is you're taking advantage of really emotional young people who feel like they're a part of something. They feel like they're doing good. They feel like they're a part of a movement and they're fighting for something noble. And in many cases, they're just, a pawn in the game, and they can be tricked into, in protests. Just recently, I heard about what was there a golf tournament or something that there were some climate change protests that they interrupted some big event. I mean, these.
Oh, is this in Nashville actually, in Tennessee?
Maybe.
I think Live Golf or something like that. I think it could be what you're talking about, but
yeah, it could. I know on my phone, like it was like ESPN notification about like some climate change protesters. But my point is like these young people, they're the best weapon because for the elite, because you can just get them emotional about something, and once they pick a team, like there's no convincing them otherwise. It's like that.
And that's both ways. Left and right. It's the same exact thing. Like it's not more unique to the left in this conversation. But to your point,
I agree.
Is that well, to your point though about the left, like the point is, first of all, that I know that was what they were presenting. That because that one viral clip where they go, well, I don't even know why we're here. It wasn't what was going on. You can see 100,000 examples of very knowledgeable, educated people about the reality, about the occupation, about the history of Zionism. And even, by the way, even those two girls that they aired on that one clip to make it seem like none of them knew what was going on, she wasn't saying she didn't understand. She didn't know what these people at this protest were championing. She was there to support them, right? My point, nonetheless, is that yes, you will find ridiculous, pink-haired, mask-wearing idiots out there that don't understand the COVID-19 nonsense and will be there because they believe in the let's just call it a left-wing policy that they think they're fighting for. However, you can also see a lot of people from the right, a lot of people that are Muslim, Jewish, Christian, across the board. And that's why I chose to make a big point about these protests in the face of knowing that the right would scream that I'm somehow blinded by what I think is funny, by the way, is during COVID, I was the right-wing maniac Nazi. And now all of a sudden I'm the left-wing. That's the case. When you're objective, nonpartisan in the middle and you're calling it as you see it, you end up becoming the enemy of whatever side, but right now, I think what we're seeing is that these protests, and it's not just these specific college campus protests, but around the world in front of the Israelis currently protesting in mass, thousands of them in front of their government buildings, in front of Netanyahu's home, because they don't agree with this. And same thing they're fighting for on the ground here. And so it's funny you call them, not you, but out there, call them anti-Semitic for protesting Israel here. And then you got Israelis over there, Israeli Jews protesting their own government to get the same end, And so my point is that the two-party paradigm played a magic show on that conversation and effectively got a lot of people on the right and across the board to disregard it as some George Soros-funded lie manipulation, which, of course, we should never dismiss that possibility. And then maybe just factor in, you saw some money that was from a couple of years ago that maybe influenced one of those groups. Okay, maybe that has an effect. We should pay attention to that. But the thing that they're protesting, the facts that you can prove and you can see in the conversations, pro-Israel or pro-Palestine being called anti-Semitic, free Palestine being called anti-Semitic, and anything Palestinian anti-Semitic, it's all a manipulation, And so I think we need to be careful, whoever, about framing it as some kids that are being manipulated. Like, again, I think that happens every single time, but it doesn't make the actual conversation false. I just think that's for our own discernment. I would argue anybody out there who is making these choices based on whatever the Fox News channel said or whatever the pundit on the right was arguing this is, as opposed to considering that, listening to what the other side is saying, or many sides, then coming to your own independent, informed conclusion about it, then you're going to be led astray, And I know you agree with that.
No, I do. And I mean, the thing is, and again, just to go back to Abby, like I said, I'm a huge fan of her work. I think in regards to foreign policy, in regards to military industrial complex, she's done some amazing work, even breaking the set. She had on a lot of people that probably politically and had different views than her own, but she would have them on to talk about topics that they were doing good work on. And I think that's really important. I think that you shouldn't shun all of somebody's work because you disagree with them on one topic. Now, the concern is always like, okay, are you only passionate and do you only see truth when it fits into your worldview, right? And
right.
Concern about certain people, like Dr. Christopher Ryan, who was a guest on my show. I actually got him to show up to a Union of the Unwanted, one of the early ones, and then I think he realized what was going on, and he just like left the show, never said a word. And but he was very pro masks and pro this, and that was the issue that I was having with certain guests, Dr. Robert Lustig, who actually, was a guest I was trying to get on forever. And then one day, weirdly enough, they contacted me because he had a new book. And I'm like, yeah, I'd have him on. I've been trying to get him on. And he's just done some of the best work in regards to the food industry and the sugar industry, and how they've like lied to us about what we should be eating, and all the illnesses that are due to people actually changing their lives and the way they eat because of these horrible recommendations that were influenced by big food. And we, at the very end of the show, we get in a debate about vaccines, and it was just like one of these things I've talked about it before, my interview with Dennis McKenna, another guy. The first time I had him on, amazing conversation about all the plant medicines and natural remedies and ways to treat people with all these natural remedies, and the concern about big pharma. And then I had him on. I don't know. I can't remember if I had him on 2 or 3 times, but the last time I had him on, it was during election time, and he just went on this giant like anti-Trump tirade, and it's just like, okay, it's concerning because there's not, like you said, there's not a whole lot of people that have the ability to say, hey, like maybe I do have a worldview. We all kind of do, but I'm willing to explore ideas that challenge my worldview or change my worldview, right? And that's kind of the stuff that like is bothersome to some extent, because it's like I'll still appreciate the good work on certain topics that they've done. Dennis McKenna, he was I think it was called like Neurons to Nirvana. It was a great documentary that I recommended a bunch of people that really go into like all the plant medicines and all the ways we could heal people using these plants that have been illegal because of the industry we've created. But it's it's concerning when, and then he doesn't see the light on other issues, and that's why people like yourself and the Last American Vagabond is necessary, because people do, and I also think it's something that we all need to do, right? Is like, hey, am I just looking to hang out in an echo chamber? Am I looking for, it's like, and I've said it on the show before, most people think they look at information and then come to a conclusion. Most of the time we have a conclusion, we look for information to back that conclusion. And that's something we all have to be cautious of, because we all can't do it. And yeah, go ahead.
Well, sorry, no, but it's both ways too, though. Like I agree with you. Like most of the time, you want to take great efforts to make sure that you're not just acting with confirmation bias all the time, but there are times when you have a premise that you are researching, and there's really no way to go about that. Like you look into it with certain objectives, but that's what the point is, that you have to be actively checking yourself. Like the problem is that we all have biases. We can't get away from that. You always have, like I guarantee everybody out there, even if we don't want to recognize it, have a conversation or a topic or a research point that we would aggressively defend. But the point is, it's okay to defend something, but as you and I've had the whole conversation about this, and this is something that I always am trying to make sure people think about, is that, like saying we don't know, you have to be able to, in that moment, no matter how passionate you are, stand back and go, but you know what? I could definitely be wrong. There's something I could be missing. Maybe you're right and I don't see it. I believe I'm right? But if you can't do that, then that'll show you there's a problem right there. There's an emotional problem where you're like hinged on, it's make or break for you. And that shouldn't be the way this is. Information is fluid, man, and stuff changes constantly as things develop and you get more added points and new perspectives. But I would also say that it's just like, I think what you were kind of highlighting right there is that just because somebody may go afoul on one topic, where they miss it, or they're just blinded by politics, doesn't mean that everything they've ever done is wrong. It could. Think about that. Ask yourself whether there's some kind of long drawn out agenda and he's a CIA agent, who knows? Ask these things, but if you can't prove it, then you put it aside. But this is the problem everybody has right now. They just want to make a conclusion. He wore that shirt that one day and that's what they wear. So he's this guy, and just put it to bed. That's forever. He's always this thing, and it's lazy. And I don't think I would like to believe that's not the majority, but I think that the problem is that gets leaned into by the two-party illusion screamers, because the status quo, which is what that maintains, is in their best interest, But I think that's the larger point about all this, where like, just because you see certain people at that protest, look further, or just because somebody over here was wrong on COVID, maybe they're seeing this one. Maybe they were unable to see that for certain reasons, personal. I mean, I don't know, but I think you make a good point. We have to be able to stand back and unemotionally consider all the different perspectives. And, you'll miss, it's the same as, for instance, looking at corporate media. We all know they lie to us on a daily basis about damn near everything, but I'll still look at what they say. Like you said, Piers Morgan, for example, you look and maybe there's a point, even though they're going to be lying, that could be useful, or maybe it's something like, I think Caitlin Johnstone once, said, well, you can watch the, mainstream media, and you can, probably count that the weather's going to be right. Like there, you could probably assume that, it's probably going to be right, unless there's an agenda there. The point is, there's some levels of things that are still true, more than we probably realize, but it's, in my opinion, it's more about the dangerous, 99% truth with the 1% lie. Like that's where the real manipulations are happening.
Yeah, and you don't want to end up doing what they do to us. And in many cases, sometimes you would refer to some good journalism or some good article or something, and people will take one issue and they'll be like, "Oh, isn't he the anti-vaxxer? Or isn't
right.
he?" So it's like you're disregarding all his work or any good points or journalism that was done, all because of like one issue you disagree with them on. And so it's like,
and you should be factoring that in, though, right? Like you should consider that. Maybe make a note and then read it still, and can flavor it with the fact that he's wrong here, so maybe he's emotional somewhere else, right? But to your point, don't just disregard it. Like, you got to be objective about this stuff.
Yeah, during COVID, I remember sharing like because Fox News was sometimes one of the only mainstream media channels or websites that would have anything that was kind of anti lockdowns or masks. If I shared an article from Fox News, and a lot of times I was using it as like, hey, look, the truth is now seeping into the mainstream media.
Right, right.
And people would be like, well, that's Fox News. They're right. It's like, okay, but is there some truth in what they're saying? It's like, don't base the information on who the messenger is, right?
Right.
And sometimes you can find, I mean, democracy now, right? How obviously we know where they lean, but they would have good reporting sometimes, and they would have
Mhm.
good guests on, and obviously they're very one-sided on certain issues, and maybe they had a reason on why they had specific type of people because it molded their worldview. If they had some anti-big chemical journalist or author, or some anti whatever, usually it was corporation and corporation related, right? It was like
Mhm.
corporations are the root of all evil, and then you have people on the right that think government is the root of all evil, and you're right, these worldviews can affect the way you perceive information, right? Because it's
Well,
like,
it's both.
yeah, yeah,
Both of them, right? I mean, it's the whole fascistic overlap of our corporation and our government that are one big blob at this point. That's the real issue. It's funny you say that because it's things like that that keep people divided just based on these ideological lines that at this point in time, I bet most of them don't even really agree with what they think. Like if you go back and they talk about what Republicans and Democrats were saying were their primary values like 20 years ago, it's almost like they've completely flip-flopped in a lot of ways. But yet people still hold on and they act like I am a Democrat, so therefore I guess I'm supposed to think these things. Like it's just so lazy. How is that possible that people are changing their perspectives, or at least what they state their perspectives are, because they are so wrapped up in the identity of being part of this team? That's the tribalism you talked about. I mean, that's one of the most obviously weaponized things in this entire conversation. And I think that there's far too many people that still fall for that. I mean, just look at the election. It's going to be ridiculous.
well, it's funny because I forget who I was talking to. It might have even been my kids about England still having a royal family.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so they still have kings and queens. They were like surprised that they still had kings and queens, recognized as kings and queens. Like to them, it was like something you read in fairy tales, and they didn't
Right.
realize that like some countries still pretend this bloodline was important. But it's funny because we look at that and we can laugh about it, but it's no different than all the countries that don't have kings and queens. They have a elite that think that they're better and should be controlling everybody and should be making the decisions, and the rest of us aren't worthy of it. And they've done a better job tricking us into believing they don't exist. And I've said this a lot lately. The elite is basically a reflection of that quote about the devil, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
or the what is it, the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing you he didn't exist. Well, that's what
Right.
that the elite did the exact same thing. Like the kings and queens did the exact same thing. The greatest trick they've pulled was convincing us that we're in control, that we have
Mm-hmm.
and it's like, yet every industry that there is controlled and manipulated. Everything from like energy, right? Like it's why is electric car acceptable now? It's because the Saudis and others have like now moved on to other money makers. But guess what? The electric car was suppressed for a long time, and
Mm-hmm.
it was suppressed because they wanted to keep milking that big oil cow, and then they're like, well, this cow's not gonna give us milk forever. Let's move on to other things, and now we open the door to those things. But every time we open the door, it's like behind that door is just more people controlling what's going on.
Right.
And
And then the lithium mines and the cobalt mines and all this stuff that we're seeing around the world, and just child labor in plain view in the day. Like just nobody. Oh, but it's over there though, so we just ignore it. It's like you're right. It just kind of transfers to the new gold rush, whatever it may be. Rare earth minerals obviously being the central point right now. At least in what seems the direction of the future, but. There's still very interest in oil and gold and all the same old stuff for what they do. But you're right. It's kind of fascinating to see what people will choose to ignore based on what they want to believe. It's kind of like a choose your own adventure book for your government, right? It's like you pick which things you want to be real, and that's the problem with what we're going into these elections and stuff. It's like I it seems almost too ridiculous. Like it's just like it's not just our inside indie circle. I mean, it's fucking everybody. Sorry, I forget if we can cuss on the show. It's everybody in this country. Am I wrong? I mean, it's like everybody, but in a little bit different perspective, is currently freaking out about the government, right? Like in a way that they're like corrupt or stealing or human trafficking or, and most of these things have some level of truth to them. And it's like, I don't know how you work your way out of that. And I think that we didn't really get into October 7th, but like the post-October 7th response by Israel, I'm convinced I think that's even hard to prove to people. I think that's pretty well accepted, is why this is happening. Had they gone to the international community on October 8th and said, this just happened, you guys all saw it, we need to do something about this, they would have never, Zionist government of Israel would have never had to ask for another thing again. I mean, even before that, it was ridiculous. I mean, things that we're now seeing are shockingly obvious. Like average people have been there the whole time. You have human rights articles and UN going, they're murdering people, like going back decades, right? But nobody cared because you're racist if you say it. Something shifted, right? So now everyone's going, oh my God, that's right there. Look at this. Article's on BBC from 2021 talking about human shields for Israel. How do we not see this stuff? So I think that the October 7th response, instead of going through the international community and just going full genocide immediately, I think Israel overstepped. I think they thought that they could get away with this. I think they thought the world would back them blindly like they always have. And to a degree, it even tried to, the governments. But it was just to children, social media, the dead children, everything. It was just too much. And they destroyed the rules-based international order, all these games they were playing. Nobody buys this anymore. So I just think that's a powerful thing to think about. It shows you that, one, things are changing because of what we are doing. I think that's a huge part of this. If we didn't exist, this would not have happened this way. If it was just corporate media relaying the information, they would have, we already saw what they would have done. They would have said what they were saying. Nope, just defending themselves, human shields, but it got blown up because Israel didn't care. And now it's all falling apart. And I'm very interested to see what happens with this. Obviously it's horrifying. It's just it keeps me up at night, quite frankly, to see what continues to happen, and that our government screaming about how they're the good guy continue to just blindly support it, even when every single entity that the U.S. in particular has always told us to look to in these moments. What have they said in the past? We'll look to the human rights group. What are the UN saying? Every one of them are like genocide, murder, human shield, every one of them. And I'm talking about Israel using human shields. And they just keep going. How do you explain that? Biden has his own party calls him Genocide Joe. And here he is supporting Israel. Something weird there, man. Like there's a whole, I think we'll find out, whether it's some kind of Epstein overlap, some kind of sexual blackmail, or just funding, bribery. I just don't know how anybody can explain that without, something behind it.
Yeah, the whole situation is frustrating and hard to grasp, because even with like the George Soros thing, he's Jewish, and it seems that he doesn't like Jews. It just
this gets into Zionism versus that. That's where, if I can get into that if you want. There's that's why that is, in my opinion, because we're talking about Zionists, not actually Judaism.
Yeah, well, and there's not every Zionist is or not every Jew is a Zionist, but every Zionist is a Jew type thing.
Well, no, the predominant amount of Zionists in the world are Christian right now. In fact, it started as a Christian group. That's the fact. That's the easy provable reality. And so what Zionism is you could even go back to things like Sabbateanism, which David Icke would argue is kind of like one of the precursors to all three: Zionism, Nazism, and communism. But the point is, it's based on infiltrating governments and religions. It's exactly what Zionism is. It used whatever it could. I don't know if your audience is aware of this, but this is easily provable stuff. It's on Wikipedia, for crying out loud, which doesn't mean it's true. It just means mass adoption. Wikipedia, I don't trust. But it's that obvious that Zionism aligned itself with Nazi Germany at the time. It's easy to look up. There's articles in Haaretz written about this stuff. And so the crazy thing is, how do you argue that Zionism was building a state to protect the Jews from the thing you were aligned with during World War II? It's a simple thing to stand back and go, hold on, there's something really dark happening here. And it's not Jews. There is an overlap. Clearly, there are a lot of Jews that are Zionists that are blinded by this, but there are a lot of anti-Zionist Jews. There are Orthodox Jews in Israel that are outspoken about anti-Zionism. They get beat up in the street by the IDF all the time. Nobody talks about anti-Semitism then, And so my thing is that it's clear that we're watching a very dark thing become revealed about Zionism using the Jewish community as its own massive human shield, as it were, right? Like basically creating these illegal settlements. I mean, everything, calling people. I mean, so at the end of the day, it's about progressing the agendas of Zionism at the expense of the Jewish population. And a lot of Jews in the world are calling this out. There's no place on earth that puts Jews at more risk than the state of Israel. Ask Jew. I mean, the whole game around the world. There's a lot of Jews that'll speak up and say this, that I'm safer. I live in Britain. I live in the U.S. And the point is that you're telling me I need to go to Israel, that is constantly under siege, if you want to call it that, because of the ongoing occupation that they have a legal right to resist, and that's safer than being over here in this country where nothing. It doesn't make any sense. It's all about trying to justify the existence of Zionism. And ask yourself how we have a Zionist president. Biden is openly, I'm a Christian Zionist. There's something very alarming going on there. And this whole AIPAC conversation, the funding through our government, these things are called anti-Semitic tropes. It's like, hold on, I'm not even talking about Jewish people here. I'm talking about a Christian Zionist, and I'm talking about an organization that's a political organization that is clearly aggressively influencing the outcome of policy in real time. That's not even lobbying, guys. That's straight up bribery. You know what I mean? And it's just so transparent, but all they can do, and I'm talking about Zionists, is just call it racism. It's not, and like I said, I guarantee there are overlaps, right? I'm sure there's a person out there that despises Jews that loves this because he's making it all about Jewish people. But the point is that person is working on the side of what the Zionists want. They want the aggression. They want the perceived actions against Jews because they want to justify their existence. I'm telling you, this is not even as contentious as it may seem to some people. It's because this will and is currently becoming, Haaretz, Times of Israel even, but more so Haaretz, have covered these kind of conversations. The history of Nazism and the overlapping with their government, it's just crazy, man. But again, the more it comes out, the more people will hear about this. And I'm going to continue to do the work on this because it's important that people see this stuff. And you can all day pretend that I secretly hate Jewish people and that's why it's happening. It's not true. I'm standing alongside all of the Holocaust survivors and Jewish groups and Jewish communities that are screaming that Zionism doesn't represent them. All right. So at the very least, you can say that I'm anti-Zionist. I'll go with that. But it's not about religion, ethnicity. It's not.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. You're anti-Zionism. I think that should be a term that should be coined and used much more in this argument and discussion.
They just call it, right? They call it anti-Semitic. That's all they do. They say it is. That's why the whole thing right now from Colombia and our own government, the bill they just passed is saying anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. There's no, so that way you can be put in jail for saying, like, think of it like this. It's like saying I'm anti-Republican. You're going to get locked up. You're anti-Christian for saying that. That's the same thing that's happening. Zionism is provably a 150-year-old political ideology. It's not Judaism, which is thousands of years old. It's just not the truth. But people are starting to see it,
Well, I think, yeah, there's a link between the two. And I think people...
Of course. There's a link between anything like that, though, right? There's a link between anything where you can have, like, first realize that the point is that, in my opinion, but I think it's very clear, creating that sentiment is in the interest of Zionism. So it becomes the idea of trying to create that same, and then of course, by you can create that sentiment that'll be there, but you will always have racism. Like, for instance, if I said I'm anti-Republican, which means I'm anti-Christian, well, I'm willing to bet you there are people that are anti-Christian that also hate Republicans. Doesn't mean that they're the same thing. You know what I mean?
So, yeah, I do. And I think that is a very important point. But do you think that Zionism was was it religiously motivated? Was it really about the Holy Land, or was it just a way of control and a way, like you said, it's political, it's more political than it is holy, for a lack of a better way of putting it?
I think it's the latter, but it's always a little bit of both. I will, and I can't speak to what these people's minds were, but I would be willing to argue that there was some elements of this that maybe truly believe what they were doing or believe that this was there's always going to be that. But I think what's very, very clear is if you look into the information, it was a Christian, Zionist Christians were the original kind of idea behind this, that the idea was about convincing the Jewish population. And right there, you can argue that they thought it was in their best interest. I don't think so. I think it's all back to this point in time. You can prove that it was about moving the Jewish populations of the world to what they would later claim was the state of Israel. And even at the time, it wasn't decided that it would be Palestine. There was multiple choices. And, so it's not with the game they play about God-given and all this. It's easy to prove this isn't true. My point, though, is that they then convinced this to happen. And through that process, people like Israeli historian, highly respected, Avi Shalom, says that he grew up in the area, but there's lots of evidence to show that the Zionists were bombing the Iraqi Jews to get them to go to Israel or where the place they were going to go to. Or, for example, a document right on CIA.gov discussing the Haganah, the military group, and basically saying that they were willing to sacrifice all the Jews in the Arab countries if they got what they wanted. All this is all on the record, And so right there, at the very least, you can say, well, it's only about some Jews if they have the right color, apparently. So it's like, and if you really listen to people like Avi Shalom or anybody who is truly a historian on this fact, I've had great interviews with Zachary Foster, a PhD from Princeton in Palestinian history. Zionism is inherently a racist ideology. It's what it is. It's based on this superiority mentality. And especially the idea that the state of Israel is verifiably an apartheid state today, according to Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, Israeli B'Tselem human rights group. I mean, across the board. It's apartheid, which means it's the worst kind of racism. All these things are easy to prove, but you just say, oh, you're racist. You only think all of that because you hate Jewish people is seemingly the only answer that people get. So, I mean, again, sure, that's in some cases, but the obvious facts don't change because you think that one person might be racist.
And just like most things in history, if you watch a great old documentary called Promises and Betrayals, which is about the World War I, the fall of the Ottoman Empire, and how the French and the British were promising all these different types of people their own countries and land and all this stuff. And obviously the title of the documentary, Promises and Betrayals, can kind of, I guess I spoiler alert, they betrayed. And then also there's the transfer agreement, which you're aware of, which is another thing that nobody talks about, right? So there's so many layers of this. I know we're limited on time. Do you want to touch on October 7th? Just I guess your overview on are you pretty confident in believing that they knew it was basically a September 11th type thing where they knew it was going to happen. They kind of let it happen. And for the purpose of, I mean, now looking back and reflecting on just, what happened afterwards, it seems like, well, this is their way of justifying the actions that came later.
Yeah, it's a hard thing to wrap up in a small period of time, but I think what's important to realize is that at least the evidence that has now been presented through Haaretz, through New York Times, through Egypt, through a lot of different entities. So it becomes really difficult to just go, it's all fake, which it certainly always could be. It's very clear. And then, again, the New York Times put this report out, I think it was November 2023 or December. It's like a while ago. Operation Jericho Wall, I think it was. The point is that they had this information all the way back then, that they knew this was going to happen at some levels. And that the one that we just got from them, I think Khan News Network kind of followed up and put another report out. Same thing. And this one had more specific details, but it was generally the same idea that, yes, they knew this was coming and they, at some levels, didn't act. Now, you could argue that and this is where the game is played, is everybody's difference of opinion, that one side, some people argue that, well, they just thought it was imaginary. That was one of the quotes. They said, there's no way they can do that. They underestimated their ability. I think that's easy to verify isn't true. The other side of it is that at some level, they ignored Egypt telling it was coming months ahead of time. They ignored, repeated countless examples of their own security people on the watchtowers telling them, and this is written by, I think Ynet News covered this, Haaretz covered this, where they were coming out and they were coming and going, Commander, we see them. They're literally practicing at the walls. We see them doing this. We see them getting ready. We see, we see it. They're doing something. They're coming. And they said, stop. And they got so many times that they said, if you keep doing this, I forget their exact wording. They said, we're basically going to lock you up if you keep bringing this to us. That's coming from Israeli media. I don't know, that alone, how you disregard how crazy that is. Like, they're just going, shut up, or we're going to arrest you for telling us that we're going to be invaded. And no, but there's so many examples around just that concept right there about the information they saw coming. Then you can get into the day it happened. Efron Fangenson, who's a former IDF member who's been speaking about this, she's an Israeli Jew herself, said that she said, look, there are guns on, auto turrets, like AI turrets, that will react to a cockroach. And none of that was active. Right. So the day this happened, there's anywhere between, I think they say 4 to 6 hours. I don't know how you can even rationalize 1 hour, quite frankly, but this is coming from insiders. Hours of nothing. They would break through the wall and there's empty checkpoints. There's nobody there. I mean, I don't know how you explain that, right? And I guess the argument was that we moved some people over to this area for the West Bank or something because there was a problem. But again, what about the machine guns? What about the turret? What about the surveillance drones? I mean, there's so many things they have going on. It's the most surveilled place on the planet. So my point is that the information that both the reports are showing is that they did know, or at least got warned many times beforehand. I argue, might sum up my opinion on this, and there's so much more to get into about the Nova Festival, the timing, and that it was moved. And like, I am convinced somebody knew about this, 100%. And that's my opinion. Aside from the obvious provable information we have, I mean, like the intent side of it, that this was something that somebody allowed. Now, you could debate the let it happen, made it happen dynamic, right? Whether this was driven, that's where I highlight the obvious evidence going all the way to 2020 that Hamas at some level was being funded by Israel. That doesn't mean that it's all on Israel's side. I think I was going to say it earlier, but that would be my response to something like Piers Morgan would give you, but they'll cut you off before you can get this out. That's the point. But it would be simply that, look, you can prove that Israel's funded Hamas. And I mean, like, from the origin point to where they are today, and realize that what they did, and as his statement in 2019 to his own Likud party, Netanyahu, that Haaretz covered, states unequivocally, we need to keep funding them to make sure they don't make a two-state solution. Well, that's paraphrasing. They said to keep them divided between the PLO in Fatah in West Bank and Hamas in Gaza. So you're funding them to make sure they're in power, right? Then you turn around and scream that they elected them in 2006, and that's why you have to keep them at odds. You made that happen. Now, I can't speak to whether the election was valid. I find it impossible to believe they allowed a real election. They're terrorists, but go ahead, let you vote. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. But my point is that they're funding them. So I think there's a level of that group that is maybe this very day that is in some ways acting in the interest of Israel, maybe just in the interest of who pays them, right? That's not surprising. But from at least 2006 forward, you can clearly see the changing, the reality that, like, they changed their charter in 2017. You can see that people who were children, well before that even, going back to the Nakbas before that, or even 2006 forward, grew up, wanted to do something, or angry about the fact that they're illegally occupied, and they joined Hamas, one of the largest, most strategically active groups. And so I think the demographic of it changed. The intent of the group changed. And I think that's a huge part of it. But that's not to say that I think they didn't do anything wrong. There's clear crimes they committed. They kidnapped children. These are crimes. They should be accountable for that. But the point is that no matter who you point to, I don't care how bad you think they are, on October 7th, the act of Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad or individual Palestinians of taking weapons and attacking military installations, or simply going through the walls that were left open for them. I'm not talking about the settlements and that after that. I'm talking about going through a checkpoint. That was a legally protected act. Let me say that again. So this is a fact that is not disputable of international law. You can dispute international law, but at the time this happened, the acknowledged international law, the Fourth Geneva Convention, states that you have the right to armed resistance or armed rebellion if you are an occupied territory. That doesn't mean because you were bombed that day. It means you could wake up and decide to attack the occupier, and that is a legally protected act. Everything else that might happen around that that's a crime, those are crimes. But what I always say is that if you're going to apply the logic that because somebody kidnapped a child, or let's just even say you think they raped, pillaged, and murdered, despite the fact that most of that is denied by Hannibal Directive or the lies around whatever happened there, you can clearly then invalidate every war that's ever happened. You know how much rape and pillaging and murder took place in Iraq? And I would argue they are all illegal wars, but the point would be that that's only applied to this one angle. So you can't disregard all of that. So the point being that I think it's a legally protected act, and that changes the whole dynamic of October 7th. And I think that possibly, back to your point, is that some faction of this government drove this to, or wanted this to happen. And I think it's the Zionist side of this that uses this kind of act to justify its existence, to rile up a whole bunch of hate for Arabs, Muslims, or anybody in the Middle East under the idea that they all hate Jewish people, even though that's not even what happened. There were more people that were killed that day that weren't Jews, but nobody talks about that, right? Like, there's all these different levels of this, the Bedouin areas and so on. The point is that it's about creating the dynamic that's useful for Zionism in particular. And I think that you can show that some people in the government may not have wanted or may not believe in, like, the prophetic side of this. That's a whole other topic to get into. But I think that, I guess, to sum up the point is that I think some level of them wanted this to happen, allowed this to happen, even drove it to happen. And I just don't think that they expected either the response that did happen, right? Like the people that did rush in, civilians, the other actions that may have happened, or that was the plan, which is pretty messed up, because we can prove that, I mean, at least half of the people that were killed there were killed by the IDF. This is not my opinion. This is coming from people on the ground, from Haaretz, from Israeli articles, from tank drivers, helicopter pilots, the security head at the kibbutz Be'eri himself, or Yasmin Porat, who still testifies to this day that she watched them explode a house full of civilians. They did that under the Hannibal Directive, according to a colonel who called it a mass Hannibal in the Israeli military. Anyway, all these points are important, but most people just don't get all this stuff,
Yeah, and it's not hard to believe that this is going on because I mean, look at the weapons we're giving to the moderate rebels in Syria, right? Like, who
right?
are these people?
Azov movement,
Yeah, exactly. Bin Laden got, our help when they're
Saddam, every one of them.
everybody, every bad person. I mean, the School of Americas, remember that?
Yeah.
I don't know if that's still around. I think it was in Georgia or wherever it was. But they were basically, training people who are gonna eventually kill other people, innocent people. So it's like it's insane. This stuff happens all the time. It's not hard to believe that it's still happening and happening there. And two things can't be true at once. I mean,
Exactly.
that documentary, and I believe it was a book too, about the Soviets raping and killing innocent German people during World War II, and all these villagers, farms and villages that were raped and just horrible things were happening to them, and it was justified because Nazi Germany was the evil, the evil bad guys, the evil empire. We got to do what we got to do to stop them, which obviously was true. Like we had to put a stop to that, but it also was true that a lot of horrific things happened to German people who didn't have the same ideologies or weren't politically motivated to some extent. So it's it's fascinating. People are, I think in most cases too tribalistic and really struggle to see things that will push back against our worldview. I mean, that documentary Hellstorm got a lot of shit because it's like, what are you doing painting, Nazi Germans as or Nazi Germany during World War II as victims? How dare you do that? It's like, well, there was victims, there were victims on both sides,
Well,
so
you can never prove what level of civilian people. It's again shocking how many overlaps there are to the Nazi conversation and what Israel's currently doing, but that you can see the way that they're framing all people in Palestine. Well, they voted for them, or they're, like at the moment they started this, there was no category in which they weren't able to be killed. They were either voting for them, they were human shields, they've refused to leave, or they're part of them. And there was no category which that was one of the people that they fall into one of those no matter what. And every one of those are justifications to kill them. And so it's just the dehumanization. And you can and the point to make there, by the way, is that it was 46% of the vote, a plurality, not even a majority, that voted for Hamas. So it wasn't even most of them. And there's the kids that are born today that weren't even alive when that happened. It's like it's just such a game that gets played. But yeah, you're right. And I think that civilians always need to be protected. Like, I'll put it this way. I don't care whether you're talking about a civilian that supports Hamas or a civilian to support the Nazis. You're a civilian. You should not be like the game that we play where suddenly it's like civilians are, should be protected unless you think this. It's like, you're the bad guy right there. The one who made that point. You're the bad guy. You're the one with the ideology that justifies killing civilians because you don't like what they think. That's not what we're supposed to pretend that we are. You know what I mean? And it's what they all pretend that they are. Israel, the United States. But I think we're getting a rapid course on how there have never been those things.
Well, I know we if there is any deep dives, because I know we didn't have enough time to go as deep as probably you go on your show. If there's any deep dives, recent ones that you think are really important for people who want to learn more about this topic, send me the links. I'll put them in the show description. Yeah. People can listen to your amazing work and deep dives into these topics. And thank you, Ryan. As assumed, 1 hour is not enough.
Yeah, exactly. No, but like I said, brother, I love talking with you, man. I'm down to go on all the time. Let me know. Just shoot me, week out. Let's make it happen. I'm down to join you, every month, every week. I don't care. But the show I'll send you is the October 7th and Hannibal Directive overlap. That it's undeniable. Literally undeniable. Like, you watch this and all the source materials there, most coming from Israeli media and different Israeli sources who are admitting this stuff. You can argue the nuance of it. You should, but it's just undeniable that this stuff took place, that the IDF murdered their own people because they were ordered to. There's interviews with these people going, yeah, and we didn't know, and we shot because they told us to, like, on the record. And yet you get debates between Biden and, whatever else. Like, just I think the thing we're all seeing is that the media apparatus, the governments, I mean, everything they are is dishonest. I don't even know if they recognize that anymore, but it's just dishonesty as a tactic, as a policy all the time. So the facts are there if you want them. It's an important breakdown. But I think most of what I try to do on our shows in longer form is to, not just give you headlines to repeat for a certain side that you want to high five with, but actually understand the information and to be able to disagree if you want, or to share it with somebody else and be able to actually discuss this stuff and not just rapid fire bullet points, which is what most people end up doing today. The illusion that we don't have time for this, I'm not like saying that everyone has time to watch a 4-hour show. I know I do long shows in general, but go through the source material. If you don't want to watch a show, the links are all there for you. All I want is people to learn, to understand, to be able to be critical. That's all I want.
Yeah, people struggle to be critical. Just recently, this Saturday, Sam Tripoli and Eddie Bravo were in Connecticut. I live in Massachusetts. So anytime they do a show at this place called the Broadbrook Opera House, shout out to them, they I go meet up with them and hang out. So we're on stage and they do this thing called like conspiracy Shark Tank type thing where you come up and you pitch your conspiracy. And I was talking about something. I was talking about like free energy or anti-gravity something. And I've been really doing some deep dives. Well, I've done some deep dives into it, but I'm like revisiting this because it seems to be a popular topic again about all, possibly the government suppressing this information technologies, all these great inventors that came before us that could create, 0 point, energy sources and could give us all free energy and really change the way we look at the universe. And of course, I bring up Terrence Howard, and people are like, boo, and I brought up like Billy Carson, and it's like, boo, they think they're, and the reason why they're booing me was because Flat Earth Dave was with us, David Weiss, and there's a lot of flat earthers in the house, and they were mad at that. It's like, but again, this goes back to what we're saying. Like, so you're disregarding everything Terrence Howard says or everything that Billy Carson says or all these people who've done some great research and have some really thought-provoking ideas and theories, all because they think the earth is round. It's like, come on. And the thing about the flat earthers is like, I appreciate the fact that they're pushing back against this idea of like, no, we are special. And a lot of people who are anti-flat earthers believe in the materialistic world of like, hey, no, we're not the center of anything. We're not, we're not important. Like we're just it was just all, by chance. There's no creator. There's no nothing. There's nothing spiritual or supernatural that you can take seriously. And I like their pushback against that. But I think, they've become borderline, tribalistic, and I'm saying borderline. And I'm because I'm sure I'm gonna get some angry comments. But that cult will turn on you quickly. And
it's like all of them. It's like no planes, 9/11. These are not in any way we should be asking these questions. I love the concept. Of course, I mean, like we should be trying our best to evaluate these things, dive through them. Like I did a long time ago, a show about it, kind of frame keeping an open mind, like showing that you can't go into a talk like this or research expecting it to be fit. You're going to find what you want to find, right? We just talked about that. But it's like any of these like train theory, germ theory, like you get to this point where there's a lot of people in these conversations that are honest, objective people that will happily tell you they think you're wrong. You're missing something if you don't think what I think, but we can have an amicable conversation. You can accept that I don't agree with that, and it's not that I'm suddenly the worst person alive. But then you get the ones that are like that. You're a shill. You're doing that, and which, by the way, could be true, right? It's always possible. But the idea is it becomes like this blanket assumption because you don't think that. I get that constantly with at least more so during the hype of the COVID conversation from the terrain theory conversation. And I've spoken with a lot of them. I respect a lot of them, but there's plenty that I really don't because of the way that they conduct themselves and the way that they come out and say, it doesn't even worth getting into. It's the same point, where it's like, I'm trying to have an objective conversation and it's like within a certain category, or like arguing from within their narrative. And it's like, nothing you say from here forward is fact because this is not real. It's just like, it's a willful ignorance. It's shutting yourself down. Even if I am wrong, like to your point, you should still consider what he's saying just because you think he's wrong about this point or, it's a problem, but that's exactly what I think is weaponized. The reason I mentioned 9/11 is because that was a huge part of that, where I even had interviews with somebody like that, where, it got into that conversation and I'm fully aware of the dynamics and the information why they argue no versus playing, kind of a thing. And I think there's valid questions around these things, but it's not even getting into what I think about it. The point is that you have people that will attack the other side of this conversation, even though we're both going, the government did it. We're both like, they're the one that did this to us. And they're like, you're working for the government. And it certainly could be, but it just, I think all those are there in every one of these major conversations designed to keep us at each other's throats instead of the person who's actually strangling you, which is just like the two-party illusion.
Yeah, my problem with them is like they want you to know, they want to know if you're on their team or not before they and then they decide if they like you or not, right? It's like, so what do you think the Earth is? Like anytime I've had a discussion with a flat earther, it's like it's always like, well, what do you think? Like it's like they want to know because that one, yes or no changes if they are going to agree with me or like me or whatever. It changes their whole perspective on me, which is concerning. You shouldn't. But I also agree with you 100%. I think we talked about this before. Like, you shouldn't also dismiss anything. Like, I didn't ever go into flat earth thinking like this is the most ridiculous thing ever. I'm not going to look into it. The first thing I did was like, this is really fascinating. I'm going to look into it.
A lot of valid points.
Yeah, a lot. And when in regards to like science lying to you, in regards to NASA lying to you, in regards to like they highlight a lot of really important things. And maybe if you still, don't agree with like the way that they look at the world in regards to it being flat, like there's a lot of other things. Just researching this topic, there's a lot of other things you can learn from it that is
totally
an important.
Sorry, I was gonna say there's definitely lies. That's easy to see, right? I mean, like that's the thing, like about Antarctica, and like there's definitely things that I'm like, yeah, well, that's fucking crazy. There's something wrong right there. They're lying about something. I just think they're correct about the idea that it's flat, and I could be wrong about that. Like I think I've extensively went through this, and I don't think that that's the outcome, and I'm sure they disagree with that. I'm okay with the ones that are like, okay, I accept that you don't agree. And as opposed to then writing my name down, going, oh, this guy's a bad guy. It's like it's just funny, and it's like that we have to be able to amicably disagree, and I think that's weaponized in every possible way. But you're right, it's in 1,000 different conversations today.
Absolutely. Well, of course, I'd have you plug all your stuff, but I think you always say the lastamericanvagabond.com is the best spot to go
right.
to. And you are on some social media platforms and you are on some video platforms, but definitely check out the website first and you'll have links to all those other things. So it's a one-stop shop. And of course, also some great articles and work from others like Whitney Webb and Derek are on your website. So definitely worth checking out. Thank you, Ryan, for all the amazing work you do, all the hours and hours of research you do. Please, people, support his work. I think that many of us, people don't realize how much of our time we donate to the world by, just putting out content that's thought-provoking and hopefully important in regards to just understanding the world around us. And hopefully people appreciate it. And if you do appreciate it, give him some value back, because he's obviously giving us much value with his research and whatnot. So, hey, enjoy the rest of your day. Good luck with the rest of your shows. You're probably doing a couple, I'm sure, today. And we'll definitely have to do this sooner rather than later.
I want to, man. Let's make sure we make that happen. I always enjoy talking with you, brother.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ryan. Take care. Thanks for the time.